On behalf of the Cascade Human Resources Department, I'd like to welcome you all to our presentation on the Cascade Drill Down Program. This is a new interviewing process for assistant drillers that we're implementing as of today. We're going to spend about 10 to 12 minutes talking about a few things. First of all, why we're doing it, how it works, and I will tell you that it's simple and builds off of tactics that I'm sure you're already using. Show you how we got extensive feedback to make sure that we're looking at and probing the right things. And lastly, talking about exactly how it works and showing you an example. Now, first of all, let's talk about why we're doing it. We started with an analysis where we looked at results over the past year and a half, where we looked at between 2017 and the first half of 2018 market level data. And we saw that the company hired nearly 200 assistant drillers during that time period, which was by a pretty good margin the largest single employee cohort that Cascade hired. Now, the issue that we face is that during that same time period, we turned over 160 of them, which means that we're turning at a rate of 83% our assistant drillers. We also saw that the results of this were pretty universal. There was no location or group, I should say, that was doing particularly poorly or much poorer than others on those results. Conversely, there was no group that was doing significantly better than those numbers. It was fairly consistent in terms of the level of turnover. It's an issue for everyone. We also saw that there are positions that are churning, where we're turning the same position more than once in a year, which obviously is a concern for us. Now, if we're having turnover, it can come from one of three places fundamentally. One, we're not hiring the right people. Two, somehow in the onboarding process, we're not giving them the tools and information they need to be successful. Or three, there's something about our culture that's not stimulating retention. If you look at the bar chart on the right-hand side of this page, you'll see we broke out the tenure with the company of the assistant drillers that were turned during this time period. And what you will see is that almost half, or 44%, of the assistant drillers turned had been with the company 6 months or less. Now think about that. That means that a lot of that turnover is coming from people that are either not out of training or barely out of it. Our current state means, obviously, if we all own the process, the challenge that we face is that we also don't have a consistent way of doing it. There are many managers that do good things and are good at the interview process. There are many managers that have skills that they have been successful in and do hire good people, but there is no consistency across the company. Everybody's pretty much doing something different. Our goal for this program is effective and expedited hiring of qualified assistant drillers with issues regarding onboarding and retention addressed in other programs. Now, the interview guide, really the goal for the program is to create a consistent process. So if we figure out good ways to do things, we can implement them company-wide. So the more we have a consistent process, the more we can learn from one another. This is also, I will tell you, intended for the data gathering stage or early on in the process. This does not mean to represent every question you'd ever want to ask a candidate. This is not meant to cover the vetting process which comes at the end. This is not measuring somebody's personality. This is at the beginning when you're trying to determine if the person is a good candidate to continue to explore it. Now, the behavioral interview process itself, I will explain in a moment, but it really works off of finding examples of things that people have done around the dimensions you've selected that demonstrate their success or ability to execute those. And there are 6 of them, and I'll get to those in a little bit. But the field of Cascade has identified 6 specific dimensions that are critically important for an assistant driller to have. So elements of the program are going to include an interview guide with questions that you're going to have in front of you when you actually do an interview, a page for data integration, which means a page for everybody to use when they're comparing notes at the end, and a how-to document that's going to explain how this all ties together. Now, what are behavioral interviews? They work off of the premise that past performance is the best indicator of future results. So what we're going to be doing is asking questions that seek specific examples of those dimensions. So as example, if a dimension you were looking to explore is time management, instead of asking somebody, so how would you handle conflicting priorities, what you would do is ask them a question such as, tell me about a time when you were faced with conflicting priorities, when you had to do 3 things at once and you only had time for one. What did you do? And what you're looking for is, first of all, somebody that was able to do this successfully. You're looking for somebody that's relatively recent, and you're looking for an answer in what I will call the STAR format. Now, what the STAR format is really breaking things into three components, breaking their answer into three components. The first thing is, if you ask for an example, they're going to tell you that the situation or task that they actually faced. The A stands for the action that they took for that example, and then R is the result of that action. Now, there's good and bad answers to any question like this. A good answer could start with something like, if you ask them about conflicting priorities, they give you a situation. Last month I was at work and this happened. As opposed to somebody telling you, well, what I would do in a case is this. An action would be they explain to you how they addressed that particular issue and exactly what they did, as opposed to somebody just kind of glossing over that and going right to the result. Thirdly, what you want to hear somebody give you is, as I said, a positive result. I got done most or all the important tasks that I needed to, versus somebody saying it failed and we had to do it over. Now, in terms of what we're looking for, everybody would like to find the perfect candidate, somebody that had all of the skills and all of the attitudinal issues that we look for in a prime candidate, but that is not a high likelihood of success process. So what we're looking for is 6 things that assistant drillers will have that will dictate their success. And based on what our surveys and interviews with people in the Cascade field, the 6 that they identified were: 1 was a willingness to travel. I don't care what else they do, if they're not willing to travel and be deployed on a crew for an extended period, they're not going to be successful as an assistant driller. The second one is to be career motivated, which means a person that's career motivated is going to work hard to get the extra bonuses, certifications, and incentives that will drive income. And if they're the kind of person that does those, they're the kind of person that's going to end up being successful with the company. Thirdly, of course, they're going to need to be able to work in teams and with others. If they're going to be deployed in the field, they're going to be in close quarters with their cohorts, and they need to be able to work together with them. In addition, everybody identified that there's a certain mechanical aptitude and diagnostic ability that's necessary to keep somebody successful with the company and to keep that crew deployed in the field. And last but most certainly not least, an orientation towards safety. Now, the way this process is going to work is when you're sitting down to interview a candidate, you print off one of these sheets, and after you fill in the basic information of names and dates, you're going to look at each one of the 6 dimensions. Now, what you'll note is that under each one of those dimensions, there are 4 or 5 or 6 questions that you can use that help illustrate that dimension. So you can ask 1 or 2 questions per dimension. You're going to then make notes on what the person says, and you've got these choices provided here. And in addition, we have willingness to travel on here, and the 5 choices that you see aren't one that you think addresses the issue sufficiently, you can add one of your own. So certainly you should feel free to add one of your own questions as long as it covers the topic there, as I said, of willingness to travel. In addition, what you're then going to do is give the candidate, after you're done with the interview, you're going to give the candidate for each of the 6 dimensions a score, 1 to 5, 5 being the best, of how you think they did. Once you complete that, and once everybody interviews the candidate, you'll sit down and have a data integration, which is just another way of saying a meeting or a comparing of notes with the other people that interviewed the candidate on what they saw and experienced from them. So this would be, obviously, you'd put the candidate's name, you would list then everybody that interviewed them, you'd then record the scores that everybody got or that each person gave for that person, and some notes if it was relevant to that particular question. And then last but not least, down below, you put a next step. After the meeting is completed, you filled out the sheet, you guys have all talked, you'd say, are we moving forward or not? It's important to list on there, either we're going to talk to them to take them to the next step, we're going to tell them we're not interested, or whatever the next step is in that particular case. Now, what's going to come with all of this is in addition to having those data integration sheets and the interview guides to fill out when you're interviewing, there will be a 3-page document included, which will completely spell out the process for you if you have any questions. Now, I would say that in terms of next step, what this is about is taking better advantage of our experience in the field. It's about being able to share the experience and have a consistent process to build on. And it's really a step in the process being the final destination. This is something we're expecting everybody to do, but we're going to continue to seek input and incorporate best practices to make sure that we're continuing to improve this. The materials are now available to you, and the expectation is that people will be using this for all future assistant driller interviews. After the first few months, we're then going to go back, evaluate how we're doing, and make any improvements that we think are necessary. With that said, I appreciate your time and attention. If you have any questions on this, please feel free to send an email to Jessica Alexander in HR, and I know she'd be